Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host, 𝙒𝙖𝙩𝙪. After a long hiatus, Professor Madhavdas Nalapat joins me again, and we're going to take a look at the de-dollarization. Now, the entire world, including the United States, is seized of this word. Everybody is having conferences, talks, discussions. We're going to have a new perspective from Professor Nalapat. You've heard from 𝙒𝙧𝙖𝙪𝙦 on one side, and you've also heard from Dr. Shah from the other side, but there is also something, it might be, the truth might be somewhere in the middle. So let's find out where the truth lies according to Professor M.D. Nalapat. He's no stranger to us. Let's welcome Professor Nalapat. Namaskar, sir. How are you?
Very well indeed, Sri. An honor to be on your platform.
Sir, you are whatever I am today. One of the people who encouraged me in the early days is you, sir. So all this success, a large part of it, I mean, I would say that you were the sole reason. I had to be also getting some backing from very powerful people in Indian polity. But this is all owing to you, sir. And I consider you as one of my mentors. You told me to write some things that, I wouldn't get into trouble. And sure enough, well, I got a little bit of trouble, but I kind of managed that. So thanks for all the encouragement, Professor Nalapat. Now I'm going to ask you a simple question. BRICS, and the new development bank, they changed the name to a new development bank. China wants to come up with an alternate currency system for the dollar. And can we have the picture, please? Professor Nalapat, what I have in front of me is 400 yuan notes. 100 is the biggest denomination of yuan or renminbi, I'm told. And if you look at it, all four of them have the same serial number. And this was sent to me by one of PGurus' viewers. And he said that he had withdrawn some money, like 500 yuan from a ATM in, I think, Shanghai. He was on assignment in China. And he didn't know what to do with it when he saw that, multiple notes with the same serial number. So it led to a lot of confusion and bewilderment. And a friend of mine who's a China watcher, when I told him this, he laughed and said, there's something wrong. They usually create 6 notes with the same serial number. This is the Chinese National Bank. This is like the RBI equivalent. So with this kind of a gravitas, how does one take their currency seriously, Professor Nalapat?
Look, Sri, I think you and I also have discussed this matter. And, for some years now, some of us have been saying that the Chinese are looking at a reset of the US dollar. The US dollar is still the global currency, and that gives the US significant leverage geopolitically. And of course, the Chinese are anxious to basically take over that leverage. So they have been developing in the RMB, for example, they are increasing their gold reserves significantly, and they are now trying to ensure that there is blockchain involved in the currency. And blockchain, as you know, is regarded as a very transparent system. So that gives a greater confidence to the currency. So far as this particular, 6 or 4 having identical numbers is concerned, the point is it legal tender? If I go to a shop with 2 having the same number, will the shop accept that? Or somewhere else where renminbi is accepted? And it could possibly be that the Chinese authorities want to basically give the downscale the reported production of their currency for some reason. And this could be a way of doing that, in the sense that you produce 6 times more, you print 6 times more renminbi than you basically claim on the books to produce based on the serial number. There would be some logic, some reasoning behind this. And I can tell you the overriding logic today, let's be honest, you and I have had our discussions on Ukraine, and we have had our disagreements on Ukraine. Today, 𝙤𝙖𝙬𝙧, the confluence of China and Russia. Unfortunately, Russia has now become basically almost a vassal state of China in many ways. 𝙤𝙬 has become a reality. And 𝙤𝙬 is working to ensure what we are talking about in this, the de-dollarization, that countries lose confidence in the dollar. They no longer need to buy dollars except, for very limited purposes, not certainly as a store of value. And then they lose confidence in Western financial institutions. So this process has been going on for some years now. Some of us have been talking about it for some years now, and you're seeing this now. The conversation is now becoming more widespread.
Thank you so much, Professor Nalapat, for your opening comments. I just want to, 1 second, sir. My editor is a little slow to respond. He's having internet connection difficulties. Sir, what I wanted to tell, I want to also look at, explain the reality to our viewers. Today, there are some cities in China where they have already introduced the digital version of the RMB. These are like ATM teller boxes where you can take these notes, the print currency, then you can get the digital equivalent. I don't know what the digital equivalent is. My guess is it will be like a QR code with some idea for you as to how much is the worth. And then you can take that QR code and go and use it to buy other stuff. That's what is the reigning wisdom. However, the interesting thing is these kiosks, you put paper currency in, you get the digital renminbi out. You cannot do the reverse. China is not permitting you as of today from putting your digital currency in and getting cash out. So it's a one-way street. That's how they are trying to do it. The United States hasn't still announced its central bank digital currency yet. There is some pushback. There is something that they're not sure. On the other hand, China and many other countries who hold T-bills of the US Treasury are getting nervous. To keep them from getting too nervous, what the United States has done is it has raised the interest rates of short-term treasury bills, like 1 month, 2 month old treasury bills, just to kind of make them say, okay, so you think you're not getting good yields on your long term, you take these short term, you buy these short-term treasury bills. They're callable after 1 month, 2 months, and so on, very short periods. Those things have a higher interest rate. So what has happened? It has led to a yield inversion. In other words, short-term interest rates are higher than long-term, which is usually not the case. If you put money in a long-term bank, you usually get a better interest rate. So this kind of confusion is coming up, probably done by the Federal Reserve. We don't know the reason for that. But Professor MD, and things aren't that good on the US side either. They keep saying that 60% of the currency, US dollar, is being used outside of United States. So we are still the reference currency. How do you see that, sir?
Look, Sri, I pointed out way back when Jerome Powell started this absurd round of hiking interest rates that essentially he's killing the dollar. And he's basically killing manufacturing in the United States because it's now becoming so expensive for an outside company to come and manufacture economically in the United States, unless you have a protected market. And of course, Joe Biden is going in that direction. Like in the 1920s, he's now trying to create a situation, and like China has done, frankly, he is replicating what China has done by trying to create de facto protective walls. The reality of the situation is that the Federal Reserve has basically done great harm to countries that trusted the US dollar. Now, take, for example, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. Take Taiwan, for example, which is under real direct threat of China. The Taiwanese are facing a huge problem because they believed in treasury bills. They bought a lot of it. The Japanese believed in it. Other countries believed in it. And every one of them is now regretting that choice. And many of them are moving to gold. And this is the situation caused by the Federal Reserve. I don't believe the Federal Reserve has any clue as to what it's doing. It's talking about the dollar being 60% outside, and it's acting as though that's not the case. It's penalizing anybody outside who is investing in the dollar, penalizing everybody, if you ask me. And that is a situation that's facing those who trusted in the US dollar. That trust is coming down sharply. And again, the Ukraine war. These are things that you and I have discussed before, Sri. You have Switzerland, for example. One of the reasons why Credit Suisse has really slided down is because Switzerland was not neutral in the war. Switzerland took the side of NATO against Russia. It was neutral when the Nazis and the Allies were fighting. They didn't want to go against the Nazis. but they want to go against the Russians. And as a consequence, the people from Russia are pulling back their money, because you have these absurd sanctions. And as a consequence of sanctions, you have individuals who are ethnic Russian, and their money is taken over, their property is taken over. You had, in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, the same thing has happened. In different countries, you have some Venezuelan property taken over, some Cuban property taken over, but here you're talking about one of the four great powers of the world, and you have confiscated currency and property. I mean, without any recourse to law or due process. And as a consequence, you have become a high risk destination for investment. The European Union, the United Kingdom, Switzerland have all become high risk destinations. The Japanese are, frankly, fortunately, backpedaling a little bit, so they're a little less high risk than Europe, United States, Europe, and I mean, including the UK and Switzerland. So, Sri, this is really helping China to displace the US dollar. Now, so far as the Chinese Communist Party is concerned, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert on the Chinese Communist Party, although, I mean, I am in contact with them. I have very strong views about Mr. Xi Jinping. But despite that, for example, CGTN, a day or two ago, they interviewed me in one of the programs. So I keep in contact. The fact is, the Communist Party of China wants to control everything. And crypto is something that is very opaque. Why is it opaque? Because in the US, for example, the FTX platform, for reasons of mismanagement or whatever, has collapsed. So the result is that you have Binance, the Chinese platform, and crypto from all over the world is now settling on that platform. What does it mean? It means the government of India, the Federal Reserve, the European countries, they don't know who's holding crypto. They don't know how crypto is being used. But the Chinese know through Binance. Now, this is what they have done in the sphere of Bitcoin. They could not control it. So they have now, in a sense, and I think, it cannot be accidental that Binance has got such a position of monopoly as a platform for crypto, as a platform for Bitcoin. I think that's a grave security risk to the other countries, but they are completely uncoordinated. They don't have a strategy on this. Now, from this point of view, digital currency, let's be honest and admit it. The Chinese are way ahead of every other country in digital currency. They recognized the future. And why did they like the future? Because digital currency, unlike, for example, cash, you cannot hide it. There's somewhere someone is going to keep track of it through online means and through remote radar or whatever. So they want that digital currency. They don't like cash. And now in China, if you go, you'll find practically everybody is using, their mobile phones as grocery purchases, for loans, for everything, for almost everything. And they're going a long way in that. And it's slowly going to villages also. That is a deliberate policy of the Chinese government. 11 years ago, they began this push toward digital currency. The United States woke up about 4 or 5 years ago. Our bank woke up about 5 or 6 years ago. But we are far behind China in this. And let me tell you one more thing, Sri. Dominance in this is a security threat. Dominance in having a platform that is 90% in some estimation of crypto assets that are opaque are on that platform. Dominance in digital currency, these are all security risks. And sadly, I don't see too many people really concerned about this in the chancelleries of NATO and in some other locations. Fortunately, in India, I think that they are concerned about it. But the fact is that the Reserve Bank of India is essentially an organization manned from a very long time ago by officials. And they have a particular vision. And, and as a consequence, their response has not taken in the 360-degree view of geopolitical current. They're looking at it from a narrow currency and financial lens. when the CCP is looking at it from a 360-degree geopolitical lens. So that has got to happen. But in my view, digital currency is the future. And I'd like to say, when Prime Minister Modi introduced this the demonetization, that is a brilliant scheme for ensuring that you can track currency. But at the same time, he clearly wanted that the liquidity in the economy should not suffer. And I'm sorry to say, the finance ministry at that point in time and the Reserve Bank at that point in time failed failed the Prime Minister and the Indian people. We were starved of liquidity. And as a consequence, there were severe consequences, which were made up subsequently by very quick action on the part of the Prime Minister's office. So I'd only like to say, I do wish a certain amount of expert thinking, 360-degree thinking, comes into play in policy, because in the United States, you have these think tanks, you have these academics. And in the Ukraine war, Shri, very frankly, the academics, the think tanks, the politicians have been completely wrong in locating the trajectory of the Ukraine war and the trajectory of Russia, as they're wrong today in the trajectory of China, which they regard as part of the solution. So I would only like to say, you and I have discussed this several times about the need to inject realism, praxis into official policy. I think it's happening under the Prime Minister. Certainly, Modi 2.0 in the finance ministry is a huge improvement over Modi 1.0, and I expect Modi 3.0 to be even better.
Well, he ran into headwinds by the name of Mr. Arun Jaitley in the first term, so I can understand that. But viewers, one important data point that I want to mention to all of you. Yesterday, First Republic Bank failed. It has been purchased, the assets have been purchased by JP Morgan with considerable help from the treasury. 30 billion or something to that effect. FDIC, for example, 30 billion or something to that effect. How did things come to this? Why are small banks continuing to fail in the United States? Well, it turns out that as late as 2021, Mr. Powell had promised them that the interest rates will no more grow than 0.75%. At that time, it was near zero. From zero, they were told that it will not go beyond 0.75%. Today, the rates are at 4.5 or something in that ballpark, or even 5, for example. So this big jump is what they are unable to cross, which is what is causing this problem in the banks in the United States. And this is probably pushed back the United States introduction of CBDC because there are bigger fires to fight. This is not going away. Every week we'll see one or the other bank fail. So it's very, very unfortunate how things are going. At the same time, I have to also say that China, when it introduced the digital renminbi, one genuine fear that everybody has when they say, instead of a dollar, I want to use a digital dollar, what are the pros and cons? Yes, the government knows where the money is going. It can be tracked. The government can also, they fear, they can also curb you from, for example, buying a car, because they think that you should not be investing your money in a car. Instead, you should be investing your money buying a piece of real estate. I'm just making this up. Because the digital currency is in their control, they can essentially carve out the areas where you can spend your money and prevent you from doing something. This sounds like Orwellian state. Professor Nalapat, how do you counter this criticism of a digital currency?
Look, Sri, Narendra Modi, as candidate, said minimum government, maximum governance. The reality of digital currency, I don't have to explain that to you. You're a techie, you're a tech wizard. If, for example, you place unreasonable restrictions on, for example, how an individual can spend the currency that he or she has, well, it's a very simple matter to migrate to some other digital currency and hold it. That is a fact. Bitcoin, for example, there was an effort on the part of some countries to stamp out Bitcoin. It's not been stamped out. There have been fluctuations in the value, but it's not been stamped out. Crypto has not been stamped out. And digital currency, I can tell you, the fact is, governments have to understand where the 𝙒𝙗𝙖𝙦 is. What they have to do is create a framework of regulation for the processes of private initiative and enterprise and trade to operate. If governments become, businessmen, if they try and become, you do this, you do that, you do something else. And just as, for example, if governments levy a very high tax, now GST, for example, I am very happy about GST, but the reality is from the start, the rates have been too high. I am very certain you can get 2.5 times the GST you're collecting now, and the government has been very happy about the collections. If you have a lower rate and simpler slabs and a simpler method with much higher, slabs for basically exemption, I can tell you, less is more. Prime Minister Modi understands that. That's why he talked about minimum governance. The reality is, unfortunately, we have a structure of decision making across the board over the last 75 years, which is very similar to what was the case over the last 750 years. And that structure does not trust the people. It trusts only itself. And it is hungry for more and more power over the lives of citizens when what the 21st century demands is less and less power, more and more freedom. That is the knowledge economy. States that have got that kind of culture, they will do well. Now you have states like Florida, and you have states like Texas, you have states like California. Wherever you have governments coming in and basically micromanaging a situation or putting unreasonable restrictions, you are going to have a problem with growth. And this, in my view, is a blessing for all of us, because China is the ultimate micromanaged state in terms of the CCP, which is why I am quite confident the democracies can confront and overtake China. But for that, democracies have to act like democracies. You remember when COVID happened, you had these absurd stipulations. Either you get vaccinated, double vaccinated, 4 times. I don't know how many times poor President Biden has been vaccinated. But otherwise, you can't do this, you can't do that. Look, this is a nanny state. During the time of COVID, we experienced a nanny state in democracies. And as a consequence, what happened was you had a huge number of vaccinations in 2020. You had an explosion of COVID cases in 2021. And then what happened? You have a situation now. Look at India. After 2020, and even in 2020, Narendra Modi refused to have a vaccine mandate. If you were not vaccinated, people didn't come knocking at your door and saying you have to be vaccinated. You could not go to a shopping mall. You could not go to some other places, which again is frankly absurd, because it is absurd, meaningless restrictions. But he never had a vaccine mandate. Until today, we don't have a vaccine mandate. And that was the wisdom of the Prime Minister. And very importantly, India understood in 2022 that this particular virus has run its course. It was produced in a lab. It's now run its course. It's no longer the threat it is, with the result that when some sensational media channels start talking about an explosion of COVID, the public don't even react, because many of them, they don't even test. Nowadays, people test only when they go to hospital for some other illness, and they test for various diseases. They test for HIV, they test for COVID, they test for various other diseases. That is obligatory. Otherwise, nobody tests. The reality is that it has now become, like every other virus, something that is adapted to the human body, that comes and goes. And this has been recognized by Prime Minister Modi. He refused to have a lockdown in 2021. He absolutely refused to have any kind of stringent restrictions in 2022. As a consequence, thank God, life in India has gone back to normal reasonably quickly, and the economy is also looking much better than if you had gone in for all these restrictions.
Thank you so much, Professor Nalapat. I think we have a few questions from our viewers, so maybe we can take some questions now. Buddhist monk wants to know, don't you think Hindus in the United States should organize World Hindu Conference every year to raise funds for lobbying and other grievances, because we are unable to convince senators for SP403 bill. Buddhist monk, we are going to have a hangout at 9 p.m. today in about half an hour's time. And we are going to go through, this is just the first step, and what are the other steps and what is the process involved. So do come and join in that one. Unfortunately, that is not connected to de-dollarization. So I'm not going to trouble Professor Nalapat to
No, no,
answer
but,
this one.
Sri, I'd like
Yeah,
to just say very frankly that
yeah.
what is happening is the Sino-Wahhabi lobby, and now it's very clear that this lobby is operating together, and the Sino-Russian lobby. The Sino-Wahhabi lobby is working very hard to demonize Hindus. They are working very hard to demonize India. Now, they're saying India is a country where there is an imminent genocide. They have been talking of imminent genocide from 2014 onwards. What does the word imminent mean? If you know, I mean, to any kind of English, it means very quickly something going to happen. Something that is imminent should have happened in 2014 itself, and now it is 2023. Where is this imminent genocide? Number one. Number two, look at the population statistics. There's a healthy growth of the minority populations in India. Then where is the genocide? But at the same time, you have so many media outlets talking about imminent genocide or actual genocide. This is the Sino-Wahhabi propaganda to basically separate United States and India. And I think what needs to be done is to show the reality of Sanatan Dharma. It's a very universal faith. It accepts people all over the place. And you remember in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, the last statements that he made to Arjuna were, look, I have told you all this. You need not listen to any of that. You go by your thinking. You go by your wisdom. I'm not pushing you to do anything. I'm simply telling you this is what I believe without forcing you to do it. That is the universality of Sanatan Dharma. And I think, frankly, we all need to basically understand that. And I think we also need to, in a sense, the rhetoric has got to be very clear. We are Sanatanis. And what is a Sanatani? A Sanatani says multiple paths lead to the same goal, the same Almighty, the same divine force celebrated, for example, in the Gayatri Mantra. So I do believe that activity is needed because Hindus are getting a very bad name through no fault of their own. Many media outlets, the reason is people don't understand Sanatan Dharma. They don't understand the reality of India. Now, people are coming here. I invite my friends who are talking about, I've got plenty of friends who have been telling me, oh my God, genocide. Come to India. Some of them have come. They've traveled across the country. They say, you're right, there's nothing happening. And yet you go back and the first thing they read is an editorial in the New York Times or a show in CNN about the hate country, India. Well, where is the real hate? We are a country that was partitioned on the basis of religion. Let's be blunt. We were chopped into two-thirds, one-third on the purely religious basis. And in the country that was chopped from us, one-third, the minority population has come down from 38% to about 1.5%. Nobody talks about that. And the reason is, frankly, I think there is a grave, deficit in the efficiency of conveying the truth against the huge Sino-Wahhabi industry of conveying lies. You have to fight truth with lies. But today, lies are like the Empire State Building. And truth is basically very small in comparison. I think that truth has got to be played out very, very actively. The Hindu community all over the United States, all over the world, they show through their example. They are model citizens. They are citizens whom any country would be proud to be citizens of. And that is the way you demonstrate. And I think it's important to give the right narrative. In this war of narratives, Sri, I'm sorry to say, so far, our narrative, although truthful, is very weak. And their narrative, although completely false, is being raised in intensity and decibel level every year.
Very true, sir. Let's go to the next question. Srinivas Jayaprakash wants to know, Namaste, Professor. Do you think time is ripe for a full-on defense deal with USA? Why is India hesitant?
Look, let me be very clear with you. The Department of Defense of the United States and the Defense Ministry in India, they are working fairly closely together. There is no question that we must have a very clear, if you remember, Sri, on this platform, I argued against S-400. I
Yes,
got a
yes,
lot of trolling about that. And today people are seeing what I said then, which is that
yes,
China and Russia are linked together in security. And
right.
you can't be confident with Russian defense products that the Chinese have not got access to them. They are linked at the hip. Yes, the Russians have been good. Even during Galwan, they supplied us armaments. But the reality is today, Russia has become almost a subsidiary power of China. In large part, it's because of Western diplomacy. I mean, post Ukraine, before Ukraine, whatever. But having said that, let me say one thing. It's not just India. When I was arguing against S-400 and arguing for THAAD, senior officials told me, "What are you talking about? The Americans aren't ready to give us THAAD." And if they transfer it to us, if they're not said yes, and this was during the Trump administration, by the way, they have said it will be completely controlled by Americans. All data will be run by Americans. It may be on Indian territory, but it will be like the U.S. embassy, an American, an American outpost, American sovereignty on Indian territory. And most importantly, we have to pay through our noses for that particular privilege of having a slice of India become part of the United States of America. In practice, there was no third option. So they told me, you're a professor, we respect you, we like you a lot, we read almost all that you write, but sir, you are humbly, we would like to say, you are wrong on this matter. There is no THAAD option. Now, Joe Biden, for example, let's talk Taiwan, a country that you and I know very well. The fact is, the Biden is giving the Taiwanese 30% of the, let us say, medication. Let's say that I am not well. Like Lakshmi and I were not well in 21. We got COVID, and we both got the Trump antibody shot, and it did work a miracle on us. But supposing we had been given a diluted Trump antibody shot, would we have recovered? Possibly not. The Biden is giving Taiwan about 30% of the antibiotics that is needed to face an invasion of, I wouldn't call it a virus or a bacteria, but to face a Chinese invasion. Just 30%. That's not enough. It's like giving me 30% of the antibiotics I need to get rid of my virus or bacteria. If I get 30%, the virus becomes stronger. And that's what's happening. Now tell me, Sri, calculate over the last 14 months how many weapons have been given to Ukraine free of cost. Calculate over the last 14 years how many and what type of weapons have been given to Taiwan free of cost. Free of cost, I'll tell you, to India and to Taiwan, zero. One is the biggest democracy in the world, the other is the most endangered democracy from China. They have got zero weaponry from the United States except by paying a very high price. And you've got Ukraine, a country that is part of the Soviet Union, a country that in 2014, one-fifth of its land was cut away. Nothing, I didn't see the West collapsing because of that. Just compare what the attention that is being paid by the United States to Ukraine, and you'll understand why some of us are of the view that Joe Biden, unfortunately, has got too many people in his team for whom Europe is the world. Ukraine is the world. It's Europe, it's not Asia. It's Ukraine, it's not Taiwan. It's not China, it's Russia. He's got all these sums wrong, and you're seeing it play out. And you're seeing it play out in a loss of confidence in the United States. So please, it's not India that is dragging its feet, it's the United States of America.
Professor Nalapat, just to add to what you just said, both Anthony Blinken as well as Jake Sullivan, both of them appear to only have their blinkers on and looking at Russia, Russia, Russia. they really ignored the big 800-pound gorilla in the room, which was China, which is how Trump had, brought the tariffs in. And the tariffs have still not been lifted, although they are trying very hard. China is trying very hard to have US lift the tariffs. The tariffs have not been lifted. But, sir, the biggest question in the mind of the United States is, who is running the country, Professor Nalapat? It has come to that now. People are taking educated guesses. They are saying that Mr. Obama is controlling this government through Susan Rice. The others say that it is Jill Biden who's running the government. And now Joe Biden has said that he's going to run 4 more years. People are also saying that Kamala Harris is going to be eased out for the second term, and it will be Michelle Obama who will be coming in. And they expect that Joe Biden might not last the second term, and therefore Michelle Obama will become the president. If any of these things happen, whatever I'm talking today here, that means there's a grain of truth to all that is. So basically, the United States has essentially swapped. Every time there is a Republican power, looks like China is the enemy. Every time there is a Democrat in power, looks like Russia is the enemy. This is wrong. I mean, you have to think for the country. Unfortunately, the parties are thinking for themselves. I'm not saying that one is right or the other is wrong. Think country first. That's the important point that is being missed by these people. I hope somebody explains this to me. Yeah.
I'm very, very sorry. Yes, it was basically Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski. It was Nixon who had the outreach to China. Then Carter, then Reagan. And what happened to George W. Bush? He was laser focused on China in the language of his own people. And then suddenly got laser focused, on now, Afghanistan, I can understand. The Middle East, he forgot about China completely. And please don't tell me that the Chinese have suddenly had a problem and they've stopped growing or things have happened. Whoever has come to power, frankly, the Chinese lobby is that they've got deep pockets to keep as many people in their pockets. The first sign of hope I'm seeing is this tech ban. And by Joe Biden, look, he's the president of the United States. It's on his desk. So I'm going by that. It ends on his desk. I'm not going to go into hypotheses about who's really running the United States. One thing about the United States, as of India, it's a democracy. It's run by a whole multiplicity of authorities and people. But I'd only like to say that, so now, your Blinken, I mean, you could have understood Blinken's mindset from his educational record. He was completely obsessed with Russia. Jake Sullivan was obsessed with the KGB threat during the time when there was the Soviet Union. And these chaps haven't, they're still adolescents in their thinking. They haven't matured, I'm sorry to say. They're still believing that America is a bit of Europe that has gone on the other side of the Atlantic. So, I know you can blame Joe Biden for selecting X, Y, and Z. He's also got some good people there. But I'd only like to say that you are perfectly right. The enemy is China. And that is and today, the United States, how many people in the PLA or the CCP have been sanctioned by the United States for helping terror groups through Pakistan and through other ways? I'm sure the intelligence agencies there, the DIA, the CIA, even the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence Research have data on this. Nobody has been sanctioned. So let's be honest. Essentially, and Donald Trump tried to do a lot. His entire machine came down on him like a ton of bricks, and he could not do very much. Biden, poor chap, he doesn't want that ton of bricks upon him. So he's basically, the fact is, the United States is helping Taiwan, helping other countries with giving antibiotics that are 30% of what is needed. With the result, the virus is getting stronger and the patient is getting into bigger and bigger trouble. So essentially, yes, we have a problem in the United States because I don't think Joe Biden has got the memo that is no longer the USSR, is the Russian Federation, and the Russian Federation is a pale shadow of a threat compared to China. He needs to get that memo, or if that memo has come, he needs to read it.
Next question, please. Rahul Rathod wants to know why RBI doesn't hold large gold reserves like the US and West instead of holding US dollar. Why India's gold reserves are kept in Bank of England and BIS Swiss safe custody?
Look, frankly, I think it's time to bring the reserves home. There's no doubt about it. And I think, there is a lot of gold coming into India. There's no question about it. And I think the RBI has now basically adopted a policy in Modi 2.0, way better than the RBI in Modi 1.0. There's no question about that. But yes, a lot more has to be done. But as far as the dollar is concerned, let's be honest. Friend shoring, for example. We are friends. But the reality is, we are surprised. Joe Biden is saying manufacturing should shift to the United States. That will kill a large number of manufacturing companies which are American owned. And I'd like to talk about two wars: the Iraq War and the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was a very difficult war for the United States. The casualties were far higher than in Iraq, Syria, Libya. But the Vietnam War, Johnson and later Nixon, they were clever enough to understand that they would source their material wherever it was feasible with locations that were economical. Whereas the Bush and Cheney tried to source even soaps and toiletries. I'm not going to mention other things. Even these things were sourced from the United States, with the result that the United States, the deficit ballooned, and the United States finances went into a toss that is frankly reliant on the US dollar as a global reserve currency. The day that ends, I can tell you the US dollar is going to go into a tailspin. And for that, George W. Bush is responsible for basically doing what Biden is doing now. Oh, produce everything in the US. For God's sake, that will not make America more prosperous, but less prosperous. Weapons, for example. The US should produce weapons significantly with an Indian participation. Have weapons platform. I've been arguing for about 13, 15 years that Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas, etc. should have platforms in India, get located in India. That's the only way they're going to be able to compete against the Sino-Russian alliance and their platforms that are coming on stream. And that now Arab countries, Southeast Asian countries, they're all looking at that. They're all looking at these options, and they're not looking anymore at expensive US equipment. So this is inevitable with the US. And Biden goes in to a 1920s kind of Fortress America mentality and introduced the worst form of protectionism. But in that, quite frankly, the Republicans are silent because they believe the US voter will not object to that. The fact is, ultimately, you will get neither jobs nor prosperity. The jobs won't come because, as I said, Jerome Powell is making it impossible to do an economical business in the United States. Impossible to do it. And prosperity, therefore, will not come, especially if the dollar ceases to be the reserve currency, which is what we are talking about. I want to just make one more point, and that point again has to do with, India is a country that that our soldiers have basically been martyred at the hands of the PLA, and we have, done the same to the PLA. The only country that has done that. Taiwan is the other country that is now on the front line that has been aggressed by China. Do you know what Morris Chang, who's the founder of TSMC, said on March 16th in the presence of an audience where there were a large number of Americans? He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, your president is talking of friend shoring, but he has made it clear Taiwan is not a friend. You are not daring to say that Taiwan is a friend. It's not a friend. You are not basically daring to say that we need to shift a lot of platforms to India. You're asking India to buy expensive equipment completely made in the United States, which makes no financial sense, no long-term geostrategic sense." So frankly, the problem with the Biden administration, it can't think beyond Europe. It can't think beyond the 1980s. And this is the problem. And his so-called experts. You look at, as I said, Blinken and Russia, you check his educational, trajectory, his writing. And, you have, there are people in the United States who are fanatically anti-Russian, like Brzezinski was. This guy's among that. Jake Sullivan, completely Europeanist, and again obsessed with, when he was in a younger state, with the KGB and the KGB threat. Well, Mr. Sullivan, it's not the KGB anymore, the Chinese Secret Service. And you know what? This Secret Service doesn't operate the way the KGB operates. It's much more subtle, it's much more silent, and it's much more diffused in our societies.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. Next question from Partha P. After semiconductor manufacturing in India, when can we see manufacturing of PC components like processors, motherboards, GPUs, storage devices, etc., outside of China?
Look, I think Prime Minister Modi is working very hard to ensure that this kind of activity takes place. It is a reality that you're going to have decoupling from China, because of the fact that it is a security risk to have a large number of high advanced industries located in China. It's a security risk. Guess what Joe Biden has been saying? Oh, we are not decoupling, we are de-risking. And what are the countries that are at risk? You look at the New York Times, look at the Washington Post. My God, there's a country where 1 billion people are basically just killing everybody else, just going in for genocide. They hate everybody else. They're the most wicked, intolerant of people. I'm 1 billion people. I don't want to name who he's talking about. Look at Taiwan. Everybody is talking about the high risk of Taiwan. And if you recall, the competitor of TSMC in the United States, I don't want to name that company, the head of that company said, oh, for God's sake, let's shift from Taiwan. Don't buy from Taiwanese companies because the Chinese will take over Taiwan tomorrow. He said that about 3 years ago, publicly. I mean, what are we talking about? And here Biden is talking about de-risking, and he's talking about, for him, de-risking means going to Europe or the United States. That's what he means by de-risking. He doesn't mean Asia. He doesn't mean Africa. He doesn't mean Latin America. So again, I would like to say that, look, there are a lot of issues here, I can tell you. But believe me, I think it's a question of we need to get our act together very quickly. Otherwise, there's going to be a repeat of 1930s in which a certain situation was ignored, and the wrong enemies were pointed to, and as a consequence, there was a catastrophic effect. I suspect the same thing is happening now, because I find policymakers in Washington in a time warp, which is why I'm not coming to Washington for the last several years. There's no point. It's too disconcerting to see people who have not grown up from the 1980s and the 1990s, who have not grown into the 21st century. Forget about 2023. They haven't grown up to 2013.
Next question, please. Magnet Ranga wants to know, surely US wouldn't want to give up on its privileges of the US dollar. What would be their strategy to counter de-dollarization?
Honestly, barring a blind faith that the US dollar is there and will always be there, I mean, if there is a strategy, I'm looking very carefully at it. The treasury, the Federal Reserve. I mean, the only thing I'm saying is the TINA thing. There is no alternative. The feeling that there is no alternative. But guess what? Saudi Arabia, for example, and may I say, here again, Sri, you remember we had discussions about Mohammed bin Salman. Now, there was something very cruel done to a particular Saudi dissident who was looking at regime change. Unfortunately, in Saudi Arabia, if you try for regime change, it's not like trying for regime change in the United States. It's a capital offense. And that gentleman paid with his life in a very horrible way. But Mohammed bin Salman is the chap who basically said, I am an Al-Saud, but I don't believe in Wahhabism. The first Al-Saud to break from Wahhabism. And that is why I said he should be supported. And I'm happy to say our government, our Prime Minister, has been from the very start very friendly to him, because he is fighting forces which are dangerous and which are in alliance with authoritarian forces like China. But then you have a whole lot of people, including Joe Biden and so many others, Senator Lindsey Graham, for God's sake, he was apoplectic. Oh my God, Mohammed bin Salman. So today, what have you done? You have pushed Saudi Arabia into not just being neutral, into becoming more Chinese, more pro-China than pro-America. You have pushed that country to basically move away from the US dollar. And you have pushed multiple countries by your constant lecturing to them about issues. And in India, for example, lecturing goes on publicly. And the kind of invective, the kind of adjectives that are used for India, I mean, it's completely absurd. This is how you win friends. You abuse them, you say that they are rotten, you say nothing should go there, no benefit should be given to them, and you expect them to follow you. Why? Tina, there is no alternative. According to me, the only strategy is TINA. There is no alternative. Well, the Congress party believed that for a long time, and guess what happened to it?
Modi happened to it. Next question, please. Nitin Jain wants to know, what's your view for future INR-dollar rate post de-dollarization if it takes place? And what will be the impact on Indian share market, especially when INR will be expensive than present value?
Look, Sri, that's a very good question. And I'd like to say it's very important that we clean up our stock markets, that we ensure that insider trading, speculation, and other activities do not happen on Indian stock markets. You and I know very well that high-level people, a former finance minister, for example, has made billions and billions of dollars by cheating tens of millions of investors in the stock market. And unfortunately, many of the main culprits behind that, some of them have been held to account not very severely, but very large number of them have escaped. Why? Because throughout the system, the benefits spread. You have multiple levels, multiple layers, multiple segments where the benefits spread, and every one of them is coming together in the fear that if one segment is affected, immediately that problem, that accountability will come everywhere else. So we need clean stock markets. I'd like to say that under this government, especially in Modi 2.0, you are seeing in the matter of some stock markets, certain reforms taking place, certain accountability taking place, and I'm very certain in Modi 3.0, you're going to see that carried to its logical conclusion. It's happening. It's definitely happening. So the first thing is clean, transparent stock markets. The second thing is that the digital currency spreads, blockchain gets used, and the government keeps off business. The Prime Minister has said right from the beginning, the business, yes, that mantra that he said, I accept. Business of business, government is not business. But then what do? What happens? You find in the communications, sometimes the messaging, in some respects, the Prime Minister's mind is far ahead of the messaging. It happened with the farm laws, you will remember. It happened with demonetization. The messaging didn't reach, and the Reserve Bank and North Block got the wrong impression that he meant an absence of liquidity. He meant a shifting of cash, currency to banks, so you can track it. A brilliant idea. And he never meant an end of liquidity. But what happened was a choking of liquidity. So this is the problem. And I think, slowly what's happening is officers are being promoted. The Prime Minister's office is hyperactive on that. And slowly, year by year, month by month, you are seeing a better mix of officers come to top positions so that the situation is improving. But I again repeat, there was talk about involving outside people in the IAS, for example. It's not really happened. And you involve them in a second-class position. You say, oh, you're in the IAS, but you're not really IAS. Now, what does that mean? Either you're in the IAS and you're a full rights of an IAS, or you're not. And I believe that this kind of horizontal placing, at least 1/3 should be there in an age of specialization. It should be there. So I would like to tell the questioner, it is happening. Definitely the path, the trajectory is right. And Prime Minister Modi has got a 15-year plan. By the end of the 15 years, it will happen. But it's been a very tough battle. A lot more needs to be done. And I would like to say I'm very glad there are individuals like you. I'm very glad there are platforms like PGurus, and there are other platforms that basically, you know, confront these issues head on. And I'm very certain, in the case of PGurus, for example, that very high level officials regularly watch PGurus and they get a lot of insight from PGurus. So that the fact that we are a democracy is very, very important in the reality of our progress. And may I say one more thing? Perception. Karnataka, it's a very tough battle. It's a very difficult battle between the BJP and the Congress. And at the same time, Rahul Gandhi says there's no democracy in India. It's all dictatorship. Now, the BJP has lost 17 states since 2014. Is it because the BJP ordered that 17 states should be lost? Is it ordering it should be a tough battle? It's absurd. If Rahul Gandhi really believed that, he wouldn't be fighting a single election. But unfortunately, this kind of narrative is being spread by responsible individuals. I'd like to say I hold no animus against Rahul Gandhi. He's the son of a wonderful guy. So is Priyanka. I hold absolutely nothing against them. But I'd just like to warn them, please, in your effort to damage Prime Minister Modi, you are damaging the entire country. And may I remind you, he's your Prime Minister as much as he's my Prime Minister. So please understand that. I wish our politicians will understand it's a collective effort and speak in a way that reflects the collective reality of a confident, strong nation that I can assure you by 2029 will achieve what this perceptive question says we should achieve.
Thank you, sir. Next question, Satyanarayanan wants to know, please comment on Janet Yellen's recent statement on the US running out of cash by June. This is the debt ceiling.
Look, that will be a dream come true for China. Let's be honest, if that happens. And very frankly, this kind of posturing, I'm not going to comment on US politics beyond a point. I'd only like to say that I think it shows one of the weaknesses of the US dollar. I mean, you are talking about the US dollar remaining, the global currency. You're talking about avoiding de-dollarization. And every day for so many years now, more than 2 decades, I would like to say, you have this issue of the debt ceiling and the default. So, very frankly, Sri, all I can say is that I hope common sense prevails. There is something beyond party politics. There is something beyond individuals. And that something is the national interest, the public interest. I think citizens have to remind politicians of that. And in my view, everybody in Congress who is, and in the administration, who basically is responsible for a default, if it happens, every one of them should be defeated in the next election.
It's ironic, isn't it, that today the Republicans say no extra expenditure, whereas it was Mr. Ronald Reagan who introduced deficit financing to the United States.
And Donald Trump, who spent like crazy.
Well, the damage was done from there in the Ronald Reagan era, and then it has just continued. After that, you just keep kicking the can down the road, unfortunately.
No, frankly, I'll tell you, I don't think the point is, I don't think they're watching your channel. I don't think they're watching financial channels. Yeah. I don't know who their briefers are, but all they come up with is how to abuse your opponent, how to attack your opponent, how to attack the other party. Nobody gives a constructive suggestion of how to improve the country. It's always a suggestion of how to give a better, stronger, more vicious abuse of the other side. And with this kind of advisor around you, well, the United States is in deep trouble.
I think we have to stop now. We have another program starting in just 15 minutes. And I apologize, viewers, if you couldn't address your questions. I would humbly request Professor Nalapat to come back in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. We could continue this. This has been a most engaging conversation. I've really challenged you. You've pushed me back. You've challenged me. And I think the viewers are richer for the experience of having listened to both of us. Thank you once again, sir. It's a pleasure and joy. Namaskar.
I admire your channel. I admire the hard work you're doing and the people who are listening. I would only like to say, God bless the United States. God bless India. God bless democracy. And may we win Cold War 2.0, because on that result hinges whether our children and grandchildren will be victims or winners.
Absolutely, sir. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you very much. Viewers, we'll be back in about 15 minutes' time on a little bit more on the SP 403. What is going to happen next? Because today, Cisco and the California Civil Rights Department are going to sit down and try and see what can be done. There's some negotiations are going on. I hope that Cisco will not pay any fine. They were never in the wrong here, but you never know. So thanks once again, and we'll join. Please join us back in about 15 minutes. Namaskar.